All right, guys, moving on to B2B marketing. I think B2B social marketing, differs significantly from the B2C side. And so I like to cover that in two different sections. Right, so let's go ahead and proceed with that. Right, so first of all, defining for folks who might not be familiar with the term, just want to provide a quick definition of what B2B is, right? So, whereas a business often sells to directly to a consumer, oftentimes a business transaction happens between companies, right? Company A sells a product to company B. That's all we mean when we say B2B. Just wanted to make sure to provide that definition for folks who might not use this in their everyday vocabulary, right? Quick example if you need to pause to look at that. Right. I mean, the thing that's exciting about this is that within the context of the B2B industry, right? Social media and content marketing across the web uh, presents an incredibly huge opportunity, right? We you watch Super Bowl commercials, you see robots and artificial intelligence all over the place, and it's all the buzz of Alexa and Siri and things like that of you know artificial intelligence, and you hear big data, the term big data thrown out all the time, right? By far the single marketing activity that chief marketing officers think will impact their business in the coming years is content marketing, right? Far and above the sexier things like big data and artificial intelligence, right? It's content marketing specifically, right? Providing that level of content to disseminate out to your clients, right? 8 in 10 CMOs said that they had access to additional money and funds outside of the official marketing budget versus just 2 in 10 on the B2C side of things. That means that on the B2B side of the equation, right, there's a lot more room for growth for content marketing as opposed to on the B2C side where it seems like budgets just tend to be a little bit more finite and a little bit more decided beforehand. From my perspective on what it's worth, I'm not, particularly for graduate students, I don't want to try to convince you of a career change, but for what I think on whether, if you're deciding for a career in the marketing industry and you're thinking about whether to go into the B2B side or the B2C side, or whether you work for a marketing agency and you're choosing to, or own a marketing agency and you're choosing whether to pursue B2C clients or B2B clients. So, from my perspective, that on the B2B side of things, your teams tend to be a little bit smaller on the B2B side, and your work is a little more cut out for you, right? It's as opposed to focusing just on providing high quality content and nebulous goals, right? You tend to have a little bit more laser focus on return on investment. It doesn't mean that sales are necessarily your goal, but you do have to prove a little bit more of your return on investment. But there's a huge opportunity in this segment. Because of those increased dollars, like I shared about earlier, there's an opportunity to earn more. The clients tend to have more to spend because of that focus on ROI. Jobs tend to be safer in the B2B segment than B2C. And, because you're dealing with other businesses, you tend to have a little bit more job security in changing markets than ones that are closer to the consumer that tend to be the first that are cut in changing tastes of demographics. All right, so 9 out of 10 marketers in the B2B segment are leveraging content across the web to reach their consumers. They do this in varying modes of success, right? Only about half say that they're moderately successful. and only, really 1 out of every 5 say that they're very successful at this. So, there's a significant amount of opportunity to make a big impact in this segment of digital marketing. Right? The scary thing for me for current folks, but the exciting thing for budding B2B marketers like you guys is that, that a lot of these folks don't have plans in place. And so if you're available to write a plan for your content marketing, wow, I mean, you're ahead of, 2 out of every 3 folks don't have a documented content marketing strategy, right? If you don't have a strategy, we just covered that in the past in our last B2C lecture, that there's really strength in a strategy, because it keeps you from making a lot of bad decisions, and it propels you into making the right ones. Right? So, which tactics are we leveraging in content? Right? It tends to be things like social media, blogs, email, white papers, in-person events, and trade shows for, so it's content we're producing, things like that. And what are we looking for at metrics to determine success? Right? It's, a lot of times we're comfortable with things like website traffic, because we know that the data is there on the back end to be able to judge the quality of that website traffic. Certainly a lot of times looking for leads throughout all of this, things like that, of just the metrics that content marketers tend to use to determine the success of their material. Right, so there's a shift in perspective when we talk about content marketing. Content marketing is the art of communicating with customers and prospects without necessarily focusing on the sale. Instead of pitching products or services, we deliver information that makes the buyer more intelligent and knowledgeable. Right? If you're interested in this subject, I can't recommend a book strongly enough. It's called The Challenger Customer. I teach it in my consumer behavior courses that I teach. It's a phenomenal book that covers B2B marketing in a really in-depth fashion. Like I said, it's a groundbreaking, life-changing book if you're interested in this segment. Right, so when we talk about content marketing on the B2B side versus social media on the B2C side, right, it's a shift in goals. First of all, the goals of content marketing are to consume and then to behave, whereas the goals on the B2C side are to participate and then behave. Right, on the B2B side, our goal isn't necessarily for you to interact with that content in the form of likes, comments, and shares. Our goal is for you to consume that content. We know you're not going to share this content with your peers necessarily. We want you to consume it and then to behave with the brand who sent that content out accordingly. We know you're not going to share great tidbits of information with your competitors. Whereas on the B2C side of things, when you're just a consumer, right, you might want to participate in that content, right? Likes, comments, shares, telling your friends about something, things like that, and then to behave after that. Keep in mind when we're talking about social media in the B2B context, right? It doesn't mean that social media is not important. It just means that social media are the tactics that we use to disseminate our content, right? Social medias are simply, you can think of them like tentacles that extend the reach of our, opening up that direct line of communication with customers and prospects, right? This is just the way that we get our content out of there. It's not the ends in and of itself, it's the means. Right? So content is the story. Content is the thing that we're seeking to disseminate. Social is the way that story is told, right? So we've got a story to tell, and we might just need to package that into different forms, and that's what social media is. Right? So how is content marketing different in the B2B world? Well, first of all, it's different based on its intent, right? So whereas on the B2C side of things, right, we talked about that the goal was participation, right? The goal is, different based on intent on the B2B side of things, right? 85% excuse me, use content marketing to build their brand and simply to establish thought leadership, not necessarily to drive that specific action of a sale. Right? If prospective customers recognize your business's name and acknowledge your authority in a specific field, they can skip the initial research stage of a consumer buying process and move directly to whether or not they need your product or not, or to evaluation of alternatives, right, where they're looking at, all right, what are my options based on this need that I've already decided that I have. And guess what? If your name is at the top of that brand awareness list, you're at the top of the list of that evaluation of alternatives. I mean, think about this in the B2C context. Do you really care that much whether Coca-Cola is a thought leader? No, you really don't. You care if Coca-Cola tastes good. Certainly, you might care about their opinion on, or their your relationship that you've maintained with them, as far as that might go. But your intent with on the B2B side is much more focused at driving that level of thought leadership, and building that brand awareness. Right, messaging, your differentiation from B2C to B2B changes in your messaging. I think this quote from Katie Rosehill is really great. Different marketing tactics are used in B2B and B2C, although the same methods of advertising, promotions, and publicity are the same. Right? If the final customer is a business, the marketing message is based on value, service, and trust. Whereas in the B2C side of things, it's price and emotional satisfaction. Right? I mean, when we talk about B2B, we might be willing to spend more money on something because it's going to provide a greater return on investment for our company. Right? Whereas a return on investment for a bottle of soda, to continue that analogy, right, we're more focused on the price and the level of emotional satisfaction it gives us. Right? We're not necessarily worried about the value. We're worried about the price. Right? Whereas, the value, right, we might be willing to spend more on that piece of software if it can earn us more on the long run, or it can last longer for our business. The channel's different as well, right? On the B2B side of things, we often have a lot more limited channels to operate on, but that means that they tend to be more effective because they're more often frequented by folks. You remember in the last lecture we talked about that people who visit LinkedIn tend to stay for an extended amount of time, right? So these channels that we leverage might be more limited, but they tend to be more effective, simply because there's less places for folks to look for B2B content. I mean, think about this in a practical sense. You're a person for the entire day, right? You're a consumer all day, but we only have that business hat on. You're only a worker for part of it, right? So it changes the way that we target our end consumer when we're talking about the B2B space. Talk about, it changes the relevance of the channels as well, right? It's a little more difficult, but also means that we've got a lot more opportunity, to produce relevant content for the right folks. And finally, your format of your content might need to change, right? Tech buyers, tend to prefer things like white papers, case studies, and tech guides, right? They might be more willing to spend more time with your content, whereas on the B2C side, those interactions tend to be a little bit more fleeting, shorter formats, things like that, right? Whereas on the B2C side of things, user-generated content and real-time content tends to be incredibly important. On the B2B side of things, since we're focused on more long-term value a lot of times, and because we care about what the brand itself says, not necessarily about, maybe what one of our competitors has to say about it, or a business that doesn't necessarily relate to ours has to say about something. Right? The focus is less on what other users say about the product, and and about more timeless content and less on timely content, like would be important on the B2C side of things. Right. So what formats are important? We just mentioned, that they're a little bit more limited on the B2B side of things, but there's still a lot of formats that are great, right? I mean, numerous amounts of social media platforms are still important. Facebook, LinkedIn, oftentimes Instagram is still important for B2B clients, right? Case studies of problems that your company has solved. E-newsletters, right? Email is still phenomenally important in the B2B context. Blogs, white papers, webinars, video content, and podcasting are increasingly popular in the B2B space. We'll talk a lot more about podcasting later in this semester, and have a guest speaker on to talk about podcasting, and about the importance in the B2B context. Right, and then surveys, quizzes to find out whether you're, helps brands to qualify clients to ensure that they're the right fit for their business. You know, let these statistics do a little bit of the state of the case for me. Right, there's a significant amount of growth in the content space on the B2B side of things. Right, it's only going to continue that way. Feel free to pause this if you'd like to look a little bit more at these statistics. Right, so goals on the B2B side, right? Our goals tend to be things like brand awareness, lead generation, and engagement, right? It used to be solely focused at brand awareness, and right, as we've seen the capability to generate leads in this space, lead gen has started to kind of equal out with brand awareness for what's most important for a brand to consider. Metrics that we look at, similar thing here of what's our determinant of success. I think one of the interesting things to consider is that this is where a lot of changes have happened. After brand awareness had been the top goal from 2012 until 2014, with this measure from the Content Marketing Institute, it dropped to the fourth most cited objective in the previous year, where brand awareness took the top spot. Now brand awareness is peaked back up in recent years as people have seen the value of just becoming top of mind, right? But sales has dropped, right? People are less focused on sales becoming the most important thing, because marketers are more focused on their effective means of communicating, right? We're more confident in the quality of our content that we're delivering, and we think that our sales team can effectively close the deal just because we've produced quality content. Guys, I hope this quick, brief insight into the B2B side of things versus the B2C side of things was helpful to you. Please feel free to reach out to me if there's anything that I can do to be helpful on this. This is the space that I operate in on a daily basis with my agency, so I'm more than happy to talk with any of you guys about it if you'd like to know more. Have a great evening, guys.